Our guest for this session is Richie Kelly, CEO and co-founder of Record Media. Richie has established and led two successful digital media businesses in the last 10 years. He is the founder of Trend Media, the Caribbean's largest digital media production and development business, which operates in 36 countries across the Caribbean and the South Pacific. He has just recently finished up as CEO and founder at Packed.House, one of Ireland's leading publishers, production and development companies, after only 3 years of operation. His passion for sports led him to co-found two sports platforms, the Sports Chronicle and now the Athletes Record podcast, which is launching next month. Welcome to the Mindset Shift. Great to have you here.
Morning, Tim. Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
What we do in the Mindset Shift, we find out about the person. That really is the thrust of what we're trying to do in this podcast, and learn more about the individual and then about what they've done in their business, in their corporate world. So tell me a little bit about Richie Kelly. You know, your background. Are you Dublin born, or where are you from?
I traveled all over the country. So my dad was a guard. So I was born in Portmarnock in County Dublin, and I was there till I was 8. And then my dad got promoted to superintendent, and we moved to Clifton in County Galway for a year, which was a great year, very interesting. I went from a kiss and a cuddle in primary school in Portmarnock to being in a class of all boys run by Christian Brothers, where there was 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th class all in one room. And I remember going out to play football the first day in the yard, and the lads asked me, "Are you Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael?" And Fine Gael was how they pronounced it down there. And the only politician I knew was Nora Owen, who was from the area, and she was Fine Gael. So it was myself and my brother and the local Fine Gael councillor's son against the rest of the school, who were all Fianna Fáil. So we were there for a year, had great memories, got into playing golf down there in Connemara and Ballyconneely, and then went to Mullingar when Dad was promoted to chief superintendent, and did all my secondary school there, and then back up to Clontarf in Dublin when my dad made assistant commissioner. So I suppose we benefited from moving around a lot with my dad's job, and I would say really benefited from that. I never had problems with changing jobs or changing countries to work. I was always quite adventurous, I think, and I think that was really formative for me and for the rest of my family, who we're scattered all over the world now. So.
You mentioned that you had a brother, obviously, with you in Clifton, and we'll come back to the Clifton episode in a minute. Was there other siblings in the family, or was it just the two brothers?
I'm the middler of 5 kids. So Sinead is the eldest, and then Rory, and then me, and then I've Kieran and Mark. So 1 girl, 4 boys. So yeah, big family, I suppose, relatively speaking, for current times.
And your mom, was she a work at home mom?
She was. So my mum was English. She came over to Trinity College to study occupational therapy many years ago, and she met Dad when he was training in the Guards in Dublin, and she was an occupational therapist, but she would stay at home a lot of the time when we were younger. Yeah.
So tell me, what was it like to be the son of a guard? It's just, it's unusual in the sense of, children's experiences, but here you have your dad in Portmarnock originally, and then he moved around. What was it like in the Portmarnock time? Was this country and your dad was the sort of the guard on the block, or what was it like?
Yeah, I suppose Portmarnock isn't or wasn't like it is now then. It was a rural community, and my dad would have been stationed in Clontarf, ironically, where we ended up living in the end. So he wasn't a community guard in Portmarnock. There was relative anonymity there. I suppose as we moved down the country, he was far more, and as were we, far more in profile with the role, Clifton, Mullingar particularly. And then I suppose when he moved back up to Dublin, again, anonymity in Dublin. So I think, yeah, you were certainly the guard son in rural Ireland, but probably less so in Dublin.
And Contrast Portmarnock, as you say, was rural, and Clifton must have been very rural as well. Then, when you think of Clifton today, also has changed compared, as indeed Portmarnock has. What was the contrast like for you as an 8-year-old leaving Dublin, because you were leaving Dublin, even though it was rural Dublin, and heading out to the west? I mean, fascinating expedition.
Yeah, soccer was my big thing. I was crazy Liverpool fan. I was doing quite well. Portmarnock had fantastic setup for soccer. So I had loads of really, really good friends. We lived in a housing estate. It was, we could walk to school ourselves. It was 5 minutes up the road. So, very much my little community was fantastic. And yeah, it was a huge difference. We lived in, I'll never forget, our address was in Clifton, was the Pink House, Sky Road, Clifton, County Galway. And our next door neighbour was about 1.5 miles up the road. There was no way you'd walk to school. We had to get a lift in every morning. So very much, much more isolation, but in ways an awful lot more freedom, and a lot more fresh air. I suppose, I don't know why, but it was just very, very, very different. Probably got a lot closer to my siblings, because we were kind of stuck together most of the time, having to play with each other. But yeah, no, it was very much structure and organisation and facilities compared to Clifton, which had its own charms, but definitely wasn't. There was no soccer club down there, for instance. No real organisation and teams apart from GAA.
The Sky Road is a beautiful road, isn't it? I mean, I spend a lot of time in Clifton over the last number of years, and it's one of like heaven's gifts to us, really.
It's stunning, absolutely stunning. Apart from when you were trying to catch your football, as it was running down the road and you had to go and chase it. No, a beautiful part of the world. And just the views were majestic. The actor Peter O'Toole didn't live too far away from us either, so there was a bit of celebrity about the place as well. But it was great. It was great, really, really enjoyable. We all look back fondly on it.
And then you move into the town of Mullingar, we outside of town. Where were you based in that?
Yeah, no, we lived kind of on the Tullamore side of Mullingar. So again, Mullingar was, back to civilization, for want of a better word. Fantastic town. A lot of kind of better sports clubs, great schools. You'd your pick of everything there. I really got into tennis when I was there. Sport was a huge part of my life and still is. Not as much playing anymore, but watching it now. But Mullingar was fantastic. And just that back to civilization, I think, is probably the best word I'd use to describe it.
And then back to Dublin. So, again and it was Clontarf this time. So it was more intense in the sense of population and, civilization, as you describe it. Yeah,
very much so. I suppose I was in college at that stage. So I had, it was a good time for us to move back up to Dublin. My older brother and sister had left the house. So I was the eldest in the house at the time. So, Clontarf, terrific location. We were on the Clontarf Road, so you could get the bus into town, every 7 minutes. The facilities there were fantastic as well. So, yeah, really, really happy memories in Clontarf. Great spot.
Your dad was assistant commissioner at this point in time. In my head, that means increased security, or is that just an illusion for me?
Increased security, as in people keeping an eye on him, security protection.
Yes. Protecting your dad.
You wouldn't have seen it really, but we were a hop, skip and a jump from Clontarf Garda Station. And certainly if there was ever any incidents around the house, there would have been a very visible presence quickly. But thankfully, we had no real exposure to anything, or weren't ever aware as kids of anything. To be fair to my dad, who's passed away since, but he kept work very much to himself, and we would never been aware of anything that was going on.
So you obviously mentioned earlier you were in Clontarf when you were at college. So you lived at home during your college time at that point.
Yes, yeah, I did.
So tell me about your first entry into college.
Yeah, I was very, very young when I did the Leaving Cert. I was just gone 16 when I actually did. And I was the first time I went to college, I was way too young. There was no transition year in my school. I ended up getting the fourth choice on my CAO form, which was, terrific course. It was marketing and Japanese in DCU. But, if you want to study Japanese, you really have to go hell for leather at it. And there was too many distractions for me to be focused on Japanese when I first went into college. So I made it till Christmas on my first time, and then I dropped out at Christmas, and I needed to retrench and really figure out, because it was interesting. That was a terrific course in DCU, and DCU, as you know, is a fantastic university. But I think only 5 of 20 made it through to the final year of that course. It was very intense, but they're all doing incredibly well now with their Japanese language and marketing.
Doesn't it highlight, though, at times, because it was the fourth choice you mentioned on your CEO, that you ended up just taking it because, this is all I have to do. And, 5 finish out, it just shows that sometimes the system breaks down because of how it pigeonholes us into certain options, which really, the marketing might have been something that you enjoyed, but the Japanese was probably just very difficult work.
Yeah, it was just, I think for people that were into it, they were all in, there was no halfway. I don't know how much you know about the Japanese language, but there's, you've got kanji, katakana, and then you've got all the pictures, and every picture means a word, and there's over 5,000 symbols you have to learn off in a dictionary, and it's incredibly challenging, but rewarding. Then, as I say, for the guys that were able to stick it out, they all did incredibly well from it.
So now you're sort of 17, and you're out of college, so you're reflecting and retrenching. So what did you decide to do after that?
Yeah, I went into DCU, and I did. They were able to do degree shares with Trinity College, so I ended up getting a BSc in management qualification with international marketing from DIT. So I always loved language, and French. I would have majored in kind of French, and as part of that course, I got to study in Bayonne in the southwest of France for 9 months as well, which was terrific. And I think DCU suited someone like me. I was certainly, the structure and the rigor around structure and roll calls was probably something I needed, because all of a sudden I went from probably quite a strict secondary school and certainly lots of rules and regulations in the house to all this freedom as a 16 and 17-year-old. And, it's nobody knows if I'm here or not. So, maybe I don't need to be here. But DCU or DIT was, terrific. It was more of a classroom setting, and really, really enjoyed the course. And I think DIT definitely back then was certainly punching above its weight in terms of the quality of the courses and the academics that came out of it. I remember...
You mentioned you were the middle child, Richie, which is interesting. I'm always fascinated about, because I'm a middle child myself, and in my experience, middle children generally, and there are exceptions, have insecurities because you're sort of stuck in the middle. You have an older sister and an older brother, as indeed I have. The difference for me, I had a younger sister and a younger brother. You have 2 younger brothers. Did that have any impact on you? If you think, looking back now around, that part of your life, first of all, you've got this freedom as a 16-year-old kid and saying, oh my God, I can, mom and dad aren't telling me what to do, and I can do what I want. And then you have this middle child insecure. Was insecurity a part of your life, or and then you have sport, you have all these things colliding. Was the middle child aspect relevant?
I probably, certainly not at the time. I wouldn't have felt so at the time, but maybe in hindsight, when you look back at certain things, possibly. I would say certainly as a kid, maybe I acted out at different times in different ways. I wouldn't say you're forgotten as the middler, definitely not. But maybe you have to put your hand up and, look for attention in different ways. But it's funny, it's almost like I'd say it was probably a game of 2 halves, Tim, because my elder sister, again, did her Leavenscert quite young. She was gone to Dublin when we were in Mullingar. My brother Rory moved out quite young from the house as well. So I think almost I became like the older sibling then to the two younger lads coming up behind me. So I think that probably, I think that it depends on who's in the house at the time. I think certainly when everyone was there, yeah, for sure, the characteristics of the middler were probably there. But then as they moved on, probably became more like an older sibling to the two younger lads.
That's interesting. The fact that you had that, you say, a game of two halves, but you're the middle child for a period and then you're the eldest. So there's different implications and benefits of both. Was the program in DIT what you wanted to do, or was it again a case that this was available to you?
Definitely wanted to do marketing, 100%. And the language element appealed to me. So throughout secondary school, I would have had a flair for language, and French particularly really, really enjoyed it. So the fact you could do both was great. Now, it was on my application the first time around, but I got enough points to get into DCU, so I ended up not going to DIT. So no, it was definitely something I wanted to do, 100%. Yeah.
So how long was the college term?
4 years.
So you leave college now, so you're 21, so you, and sports is a big aspect of your life. So you talk about playing soccer, you talked about playing down in Clifton, which was only available, but tennis was something you had taken up, and golf, you mentioned Ballyconneely. Yeah. What was the dominant sport for you, or was there a dominant sport in your college time?
Yeah, I didn't play for a team. I ended up, I had my first job, Tim. I got my first job when I was 14. I was I probably shouldn't have been working, but I was putting petrol in cars and washing cars and changing tires. And work was always equally as much a part of my life. I think the way our parents brought us up was, work ethic was really important. There was always a roster. There was always jobs to do. As soon as you got your jobs done, you could go off and do whatever you wanted to do. So, financially, they always encouraged us to be independent. So if we wanted to go out at the weekend, well, then get a part-time job and you can go out for the weekend. So most of my weekends, from kind of 14, 15, 16 summers, I was working, I had jobs. So my team, it was probably I was a casual sports player, I suppose, from the age of kind of 16 onwards. Played GAA up until I was minor, and then just didn't have time at the weekends because I was always working to commit to it. So soccer for me was my first love. I have massive memories of a massive Liverpool Football Club fan. Huge memories of Bruce Graveler with the wobbly legs saving penalties in a penalty shootout. That's my first memory of sport, and Maradona in 1986. So soccer, I would have continued to play soccer casually all the way out through college. And golf, my dad brought us all out playing golf as young kids, which was I'm trying to do with my own lads now as well. I think it's a great sport, and the earlier you can get into it, the better.
You mentioned a couple of times you're a Liverpool fan, so obviously you had great times growing up, because you talked about Bruce Graveler and the wobbly legs, and Liverpool were dominant for that period of time, and then they had a big vacuum for 30 years. So last year in the Premier League context, obviously they won European Cups and they won some other trophies along the way. But as a Liverpool fan, just let's talk about the joy of last year, because now this year it's a real struggle for them again. But last year just seemed to be the sort of 30 years of effort all coming together. Were you part of that wave of emotion as a Liverpool fan?
Oh yeah. I think as a club, and there was always as you say, as a fan in my 40s, I remember the good times, and then to have that barren spell, even though, as you said, it was scatterings under Houllier of winning and Rafa Benitez, but I think Jurgen Klopp really revolutionized the club in terms of the type of football we were playing. And the league was massive last year. I think not having the fans there made it a bit of a strange one. I think the year before winning the Champions League was, for me, just the pinnacle, just the outpouring of emotion. It's funny, in my family, I mentioned I've 4 brothers. 3 of us are Liverpool fans. My older brother is a Man United fan, but I was able to watch myself and my brother watched the homecoming parade for about 6 hours. Like, it was huge outpouring of emotion when they won the Champions League. And of course, it was fantastic to win the league last year. But I think just because the fans weren't there, it was very surreal. And I think one of the major things about Liverpool is that unique atmosphere they have in Anfield, the crowd, the support. It's something that I really bought into as a fan over the years.
I'm a Chelsea fan and have been all my life, but I have to say, I've been in many grounds across Europe, but particularly in England, and there's something different about the Liverpool fans. To me, I would deem them to be the best fans. Like, they're actually what I call real, genuine fans. There's something just unique about them in that sense. And I was there today. Gerrard slipped. Actually, being Anfield that day, obviously I was happy with that. But I have to say, the credit I would have always felt for fans leaving Anfield was, these are special. These are just special fans. And as you say, the surreal atmosphere last year of winning the title with no fans was unfortunate in the context. Yeah. Let's go back to just you're leaving college, right? Obviously, you've been in Bayonne, and your French ability is improving. What did you decide to do? What's this 21-year-old going to light the world up at that point in time with?
Yeah, so I had been working part-time in Dublin Airport on the information desk throughout third year and fourth year during the summers and at the weekend. So I used to have to do the flight announcements, be the first point of contact when inquiries came in from tourists, inbound tourists. So I loved the airport. The culture there was great. The crack was great. Pay was great, which was important too. But an opening came up in the group property department for an advertising sales executive to help monetize the billboards in Dublin, Cork, and Shannon airports. So I applied for that, and really at that time there was kind of two ways you could have gone in marketing. One was kind of, particularly if you like the advertising side, which I did, I had a fascination for it. It was go the advertising agency route or get into the sales side of things. And it was a no-brainer because the average salary for the advertising agency intern at the time was about £12,000, and the sales roles seemed to be more 20,000 with commission. So and I felt I liked the social side. I thought I'd be good at selling. So thankfully I got the job in Dublin Airport. A fascinating time, just as an induction into that environment. It was great, and I had a great mentor there, a lady called Loretta O'Byrne, who took me under her wing and just really helped me at that early stage of my career.
And how long did you stay doing that?
I was there about a year and a half. And then myself and my girlfriend at the time decided we were going to go and do a little bit of traveling. My girlfriend now is my wife, but we went around Spain, south of Spain, just doing various different jobs, which was great as well. I think, I mentioned Bayonne, Spain, later I traveled further afield, and, travel and culture is a huge part of what's made me what I am today, for sure. But yeah, so I went to Spain traveling, and then when I came back, I saw an ad in at the back of the Irish Times for an advertising sales executive wanted in there. So went into the Irish Times then after that, and that was again just a fantastic place to work. The Irish Times was always the paper in my house. So my dad was chuffed with me ending up going in there, and the paper of record, and saw some fantastic times there at the time. Obviously, the property bubble was growing and growing. Recruitment was growing and growing. So unprecedented times for the newspaper, and that it was just huge growth. As they used to say, all we had to do was open the windows sometimes, and the ads were coming in. Just incredible, great training and great learning there, and made some great friends who I'm still in touch with.
It's nice that you can give some pride to your dad in an innocuous way, really, by ending up in a job that he's so proud of because it was a paper of note, isn't it?
Yeah, no, he loved that paper. It was I don't know whether they still do it, but there was a kind of a summary of the news on the front page on a left-hand column, which was just kind of your snippets, which is ironical, really, because I suppose it's Twitter now, where you're getting your feed of news in. And then his evening ritual was when he obviously his way of decompressing was when he came home from work, he'd sit in this Parker Knoll chair that he had in the sitting room. He'd light up a cigar and he'd do the crossword. That was his thing every day.
Yeah, it's a great memory to reflect on. God rest his soul, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
So you're now sort of firmly entrenched in the advertising and studying of advertising world. So how did that develop for you then?
Yeah, the Irish Times, a fantastic organisation, very, very structured. Obviously, a union company, and that stood to the staff very, very well. But I was incredibly ambitious, and I think it's funny. I was probably a little bit carefree and comfortable and not really pushing myself until I decided I was going to get married and I got a mortgage, and then all of a sudden it was like the wake up call I needed, and all like I remember my colleagues on work saying, "God, you've changed. What's going on?" All of a sudden this focus, and I got very focused and probably a little bit frustrated. Coming up to my 4 years in the Irish Times, and the opportunities obviously weren't, but they all seemed to be. There was a seniority in place which was going to be difficult enough to break through, as I perceived it at the time, and I was a young man in a hurry. So I noticed that there was a new newspaper group opening in Ireland called Metro, which was the free newspaper. And actually the Irish Times had invested in it, along with Associated Newspapers, Daily Mail Group and Metro in Sweden. So I decided to apply there was a role there as a direct sales manager, and didn't let anyone know in the Irish Times that I was applying for it. And I ended up getting it. And it was a huge leap in terms of responsibility for me. I think the Irish Times had so much structure and, guidance, and you got your corporate handbook on the first day, and it was HR departments, and everything was very structured. And then you go into startup and it's literally, you're doing everything. You're washing the dishes, and it was a blank canvas. And I absolutely thrived in that environment. And I got addicted to startups at that point, and the challenge and opportunity around it, the opportunity to build your own culture. And we had a great culture, it was young, dynamic. So I really made that move. And I think that was really the start of my startup, grow for startups and the culture around that.
And I want to talk to you a lot about startups. But before we get into that, what's interesting, just one of the points you made there about, you have to go casual, and then obviously you're getting married, there's a mortgage. So your life circumstances change. But you said an interesting word, Richie. You said, I was very ambitious. And that ambitious was pushing you to get on, even though the circumstances, in your view, didn't allow you to get on as quickly as you want. And I think sometimes that's an interesting lesson that, people listening and watching this podcast could take. Sometimes it's not always the right thing to be, pushing that quickly. It's okay to be ambitious, but you may miss out on a different opportunity by just having a little bit of patience. And, it worked out for you. I've obviously talked to other people who it hadn't worked out for. They jumped ship because they didn't get what they wanted in that ship. And they sometimes missed out by a short time if they had the perseverance. So that's interesting that, this one thankfully worked out for you. If you were advising somebody who was now looking back at Richie Kelly at that point in time, who had all the ambition, who had all the drive and the restlessness, would you still say he should have jumped ship, or would you say maybe there's something more for you in the Irish Times?
Certainly at that time for me, it was the right thing to do. But I think what I would say to everybody, and something I've definitely benefited from, is to have a mentor who is completely objective, and to have somebody who isn't family, somebody who doesn't know your own personal situation in terms of relationships and kids, etc., but someone who you can bounce things off. and I was fortunate enough later in my career. I didn't have it at the time, but I was fortunate enough as I went on to have those type of people around me, just to get an objective, non-emotional, logical assessment of situation and be able to bounce things off. I think that's really important.
That's great advice. Startups has become then the integral part of your journey since that move to the Metro. Talk to me about startups. I mean, you made a point about you have to do everything, but you still have to build a business. So it's not just about washing dishes and putting out the refuse. You have to build a business. So what are the key things that now you see as integral in building a startup business that you've learned throughout all these years?
Yeah, I think you have to have a product that's differentiated enough from everything else. An awful lot of the startups that I've worked on have been disruptive. So if you take Metro, for instance, it was a free newspaper model targeted at a generation who had stopped reading newspapers. So it completely disrupted the whole media ecosystem, and it certainly wasn't welcomed in from the vendors of newspapers on the street in Dublin. You remember those guys in kiosks, weren't happy about it coming in. Other newspapers that weren't involved in the investment weren't happy about it coming in. So, and there was a huge campaign, an anti-free sheet is what the competitors called it. I suppose going back to my point, your product has to be good enough. You have to have great branding, great communication around your product. Team, really, really important. So, everyone has to have a buy-in to what the leader wants for the startup. There has to be very clear vision, very clear communication, very clear key performance indicators, because you're not going to get to profit straight away. There has to be an understanding that these things are going to take time. They're not going to. You have to have the right investment and the right investors, the right team, the right leaders, right vision, right communication, product. They're all the basics of it. And I think if you have all of those basics, you'll do okay.
One of the things I really love what you talk about is the leader and the vision. I've set up 3 greenfield companies throughout my career, and I've always believed that it's the leader who sets the vision, it's the leader who creates the culture, it's the leader who sets the expectations, and obviously getting great people into the team just expands the whole thing. And I love the fact that you're so clear about that, because I talk to other people and they talk about culture and they say, well, the culture starts at the bottom. In my experience, the culture starts at the top and it comes right down and then comes back up. So it is organically, moving up and down. And is that a fair assessment?
Oh yeah, 100%. 100%. I think, the staff should be mirrors of the leader in a lot of ways, and their vision. They should be you should be able to walk in and go, oh, that's someone who, is in the mold or behaves with the way that's consistent with how the leader would want them to behave. And I think if that permeates the organization, certainly at the very start, I think it's difficult to keep that as you keep growing, as you get removed. But being involved in the hiring process of everyone as a leader in a business at the start is incredibly important. And to be able to look people in the eye and clearly communicate what your expectation is of them. And saying, if you're in, great, but if you're not, walk away now, because that's my expectation of you coming into the company. So, no, the leader down you're nothing without it, Tim. You can't have a silent, passive leader in a new business.
So, I mean, if I just develop that point in a little, you then went to the Caribbean. If we just jump forward into the Metro, you ended up in the Caribbean. So, again, a new world, exciting world. Had you family at that stage?
Yeah, Sarah and I were married, and we had my eldest boy, Richard. He was 1.5 at that stage.
So he was young enough that the travel, it was just a travel disruption.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, he was young, and so it was Sarah's. She's been a phenomenal support to me throughout my career and given me the courage to go off and do these things. It's a funny story, actually. It was Seon Group, which was Dennis O'Brien and Leslie Buckley's recruitment online. There's Irish jobs in Ireland. But they had ambitions to get into China, and they bought Monster, the big recruitment job board at the time. And I was first approached about going to China. So I kept this to myself. I didn't bring Sarah into the loop at the time, but the job spec was there's a city in southern China called Xiamen. It was go to Xiamen, hire 100 staff, find a premises, set up the company, be trading after 100 days. So I was just going, this is fantastic. Where do I sign up? And I went back home to Sarah, and she said, absolutely not, Richie. Forget about it. So tail between the legs, I went back to the guys in Sound Group, and I said, look, I can't go. Oh, I'm sorry, just too much too soon, young kid. And they said, well, would you go to the Caribbean and be based in Trinidad and Tobago? And the only thing I knew about Trinidad and Tobago was Dwight York, the soccer player. I knew he was from Tobago. So I went back and I said, look, what about Trinidad and Tobago? And she goes, oh, yeah, Vincey was there. So Vincey is her uncle, who's a priest. He was a priest on the missions. And he'd actually been in Trinidad and Tobago for 7 or 8 years in the 70s. And her parents had been out there. And in fact, if you go into her home house in the sitting room, there's lots of artifacts and pictures on the wall from Trinidad and Tobago. So this was a much easier sell. And we ended up out in Trinidad. We'd a year and a half over there. It was terrific. My mum got sick, which brought us back to Ireland then. And then I got a call from Leslie Buckley about a year after we came back saying, look, Dennis O'Brien wants to get into content on the mobile phones, wants to get into an app business. Will you draw up something and come in and present it to us? So that was the second tour of duty, as I call it. That was the start of Trend Media, and we had 4 terrific years in the Caribbean after that.
And tell me, what was, you obviously have Vincey to thank, Father Vincey to thank for your getting to the Caribbean in that sense. Contrasted with, with Clontarf, I mean, not just the weather, but just contrasted the lifestyle and the living, in the Caribbean as against in Clontarf.
Yeah, it's funny. We did Trinidad and Tobago first, which that's a terrific country. The people are absolutely fantastic down there. Don't get me wrong, there's a huge disparity in wealth levels there, and you are very privileged as an expat in where you live, and security around your house and everything else. But culturally, the Trinidadians, fascinating. It was very, very sad history in that there was huge amounts of slavery and indentured workers down there. So there's a real cultural melting pot of Indian culture, African culture, Middle Eastern culture, Irish culture, Spanish, French, from the colonists. So, but there's a lot of harmony over there. They're quite like the Irish in terms of they like to socialize. It's refreshing to see kids of all different colors walking to school together. So that was interesting. And then I suppose Jamaica is a little bit different in that. It is very much the expats, and you are very much in the minority, compound living, but at the same time, really warm, friendly people there as well. I suppose in terms of comparing it to Ireland, you're first and foremost, you're very, very privileged over there, with the level of wealth you have. Like, it wouldn't be unusual where you're driving to work in the morning through traffic, and at every single set of lights, there's fellas trying to wash your windows for a few quid, in the morning, and you become desensitized to that to a certain extent. But it's you work. I suppose. Look, and it's well known, and there's lots of stories around Dennis O'Brien's companies and the expectation around work. So my Caribbean experience and say my wife's Caribbean experience and my kids' Caribbean might be very, very different things. People used to say to me, "Oh, how are you getting on over there?" And so look, the 4 walls of an office look the same no matter where you are, and there was huge amount of travel with it. But in terms of an experience and a cultural experience, for me, it was absolutely fantastic, both from a corporate culture perspective and from just the living. It was like, I'm not looking for sympathy. definitely not, because, our weekends when we were free, we were able to head up the coast to Montego Bay for a weekend or jet over to Miami. So, it was fantastic from that perspective as well, that was there on tap if and when you needed it.
I think it's a very interesting point, though, that sometimes we forget when people are abroad and working in places like the Caribbean and other countries, they're working, and it is four walls of an office. And, for most of the time that's there are some extras that you can get, as you say, Montego Bay or Miami and those things. But they're the exception rather than the norm. It becomes just, another week's work. And, as you say, the experience can be different for your family, but for the people who actually are out of work, it is just, another location and another piece of work. So 4 years in the Caribbean, back to Dublin again?
Back to Dublin again then, yeah. So we wanted to put down roots at that stage. So we had our youngest fella, Paddy, actually brought us back. So we didn't plan to have baby number 3 at all. I had just signed a new 2-year contract in Digicel. They had invested in Play, which was their TV and broadband offering as well. And there was huge plans around that. So I was really excited to do it. I would say it was probably taking a bit of a toll as well. There was a lot of travel, an awful lot of travel. I probably would have been traveling 2 weeks in 4. So, we were actually looking at a new house over there, and my wife, Sarah, said to me, I don't feel great. And we kind of laughed it off. And she was sent down to the chemist to get 3 or 4 pregnancy tests. I didn't believe the first one, and neither did she. And she had to come home. If you remember, Tim, it was around the time the Olympics were in Rio. There was Zika virus,
yes,
which was rampant. So she had to. She was advised, if you can get out now. So she came back to Dublin with our 2 boys, and she was kind of between her mum's house and her sister's house in Dalkey. And, we bought a house in Castleknock. It was somewhere we wanted to live. And I did the back and forth thing then for 6 months, and it was just too much. So I decided, we've had great times there, still have very strong connection with an awful lot of the Digicel crew, board members and staff. But I wasn't able to do it anymore, and it had been very good to us, but it was a good time to finish up there.
Let's talk about Packed.House, because that obviously was another successful venture that you created. What was the ethos around Packed.House, and what was the strategic sort of driver around it?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I had discovered, content and content consumption and the internet has dramatically changed from, going back to the example of my dad reading the breaking news on the front page of the Irish Times to, immediate news in real time on your mobile phone. I used the example of when the plane landed in the Hudson River, and, Sky News broke it, but actually they didn't. It was a fella sent a text message from the wing of the plane that actually broke that story. So that's how news and information had changed. And every business I'd gone into, I suppose, when I looked at Trend Media, we were able to use the mobile phone network to disseminate information really quickly. So build news applications and push the content out for your phones. And then when I came back and I looked at, the business that the investors in Packed.House had, they had the cinema. So they were sold cinema advertising on every single cinema screen in Ireland, and about 30% of the UK cinema screens. They had digital out of home assets as well. So when you walk into a Centra or a Spar, you see a light box that was theirs as well. And they were looking for me to come in and build out a digital vision around all of that. And then when you look at entertainment.ie as an example, older than Google, it used to be a WAP feed on your phone, huge heritage, great brand name, probably a little bit dusty, needed a bit of a lick of paint and, reconfiguration of the platform. So bringing that together with the cinema as an example. So you now have somebody when they're sitting on their sofa and they're planning to go to the cinema, because 50% of journeys to the cinema start on entertainment.ie. What am I going to go to? What time is it on? What am I going to watch? And then you've got the people in the cinema foyer and cinema as well. So that was fascinating for me. So it was all about the different screens in people's lives and how you can connect them. And increasingly, Tim, it's about data. and being able to really fine tune and segment advertising audiences through as many data points as you possibly can, so that, advertising isn't, this ugly pop-up on your screen that's disrupting your journey. It is now possible for it to complement wherever you are, whatever you're doing. And that was where the vision was. So we wanted to get into what I call passion verticals, as opposed to hard news and breaking news. Like I'd worked a little bit with the likes of BBC, obviously the Irish Times. I had a news platform in the Caribbean. They're very expensive businesses to run, and you're not just competing against, the guys in Talbot Street and Independent News and Media and the guys over in London and BBC. You're competing against everyone in the world in breaking news, and they're hard businesses. Whereas now I think, and certainly the vision at the time was, you can create communities around particular passion verticals, sport as an example, not breaking news, sport, because that's incredibly competitive, but, opinion and insight on sport, analysis on sport, parenting, such a huge community, a community that craves information and guidance and advice from a trusted source. So that was the other thing. We looked then at beauty and skincare, again, huge industry, and an industry that people rely on, analysis, product reviews, recommendations, all of those types of things. So they, and then obviously with entertainment.ie, they were the platforms that we looked at. And we, we had an aggressive roadmap. We managed to redevelop entertainment.ie, launch the sportschronicle.com, buy Family Friendly HQ and rebuild that platform, and then rebuild Butte and the brand identity, all within a short period of time. So it was great. We brought different companies together. So we bought a sales representation business called Electric Media, merged that in with entertainment.ie staff and the Butte staff and the Family Friendly staff. So brought everyone into the same building. And it was brilliant. It was, again, I loved the energy around it and getting everybody together and meshing cultures together. And just really great experience. It flew by. Absolutely flew by.
Even listening to you, you can sense the energy, you can feel the energy coming off you, Richie. And then, with your experience of, the Times, the Metro, Dublin Airport, the Caribbean, Packed.House, all those things packed into one, you pivoted completely and have just co-founded the launch of a new company called Record Media. Talk to me about that, because that's fascinating. When I get the energy off you that I've just seen there about Packed.House, and you've wrapped it all up, all the other experiences, and now you're off on your own.
Yeah, I'm still relatively young, and I think I probably got my peak performance years ahead of me. But I suppose I know I've confidence in my ability to build a business, and I want, I suppose, to be able to realize as much opportunity for myself and my family and my business partner in the next 5 to 10 years. And I've been blessed with the amount of experience, the amount of learning I've had from other people, just constant college of life and the learning I've got from it. And now I felt it was time for me to put all of that experience into a vision for a new business, and go at it hard for the next few years.
And what will it focus on, Richie?
Yeah, we've got a couple of projects. We haven't officially launched yet, so we're going to launch next month. But I can talk about a couple of projects that we're working on. One of the really interesting learnings I had from Trend Media and partnering with Digicel was, the barriers to entry typically in content businesses are quite high. And probably even higher now that Facebook and publishing are having their battles, and Google and publishing are having their battles. So if you want to monetize a content platform, you need scale, right? You need, if it's an advertising business, it's about eyeballs or ears or whatever it is. You need scale. Otherwise you can't make money on it, right? So one of the things in Trend Media was I was given a free highway on Digicel's network. Digicel had 13 million customers. So when I built an app, I could preload it on 13 million phones. Now, the interesting thing about that business was Loop News was one of my proudest projects. It's 3.5 million downloads. It's the most downloaded local app across the Caribbean markets, 7 different languages on the app for different markets. But there's huge progress being made with literacy levels in the Caribbean, but only on average around 30% of the population can actually read. And that app was an article first product. So very, a little bit like, say, any of the news apps you might have on your phone here. But audio is huge across the region. So radio would be the dominant media source. For instance, in a country like Jamaica, with close to 3 million or just over between 2.5 million, 3 million people in the population, there's 27 FM radio stations. So literally, it's just, it's congested, completely congested. In Bahamas, which is a population of 350,000 people, there's 17 radio stations. They're all commercially viable. They're all making a few quid. So what we've done is we've built a new podcast app called On Record, and we've partnered with a company called Alive Telecommunications, which is run by a former colleague of mine in Digicel. And we're going to put our new podcast app on 150,000 phones in the Bahamas as a proof of concept. We've got 15 local podcasters to come together with us and a local radio station. So we've built out that app, and that app launches at the end of March. So I'm absolutely fascinated to see how we go. It's the type of content I don't think would work here. Religion is a huge thing. News, talk, radio is a huge thing. They've huge festivals and carnivals there. So the type of content that's going to be on from the podcasters may not resonate here, but it's bang on what the market wants down there. And we're building a community. We're building a new media. It's very, very exciting. So the plan would be, if we can nail it in the Bahamas after 3 months, then we bring it to other markets after that. So that's one project we're working on. We've also signed a strategic partnership agreement with the Business Post Group to help them on their roadmap to become more multimedia, more multi-channel, to help them with content partnerships from the brand side. So one of the things we did really well in Packed.House was we worked with brands to create, really compelling video content for them and audio content with podcasts. So we're gonna help the Business Post Group to do that. And then we've got a really exciting podcast that we're launching called The Athlete's Record, which will be more audio documentary style than podcasts. So, the barriers to entry in podcasting are quite low. And there's probably 10% of the podcasts are getting 90% of the listenership. Only 10% of people making podcasts are making any money from them at the moment. And we feel that if we really layer in storytelling and production and documentaries, like I don't know whether you listen to the George Gibney podcast, but there's a scene in it where the lads are outside his house and you feel like you're in the car with them. And you can close your eyes and you can feel like you're there. And that's what we're trying to get to. So we've got some really exciting guests coming up. We had Ian Madigan this week, who was a great story to tell, from when his career was in the doldrums after the 95 World Cup, and the fact he's come back. We've got the Irish 800 meter record winner, Shifra. She's going to tell us her story. That's fascinating. The athlete's record and her couldn't be better aligned at the moment. So yeah, there are a couple of the things we're working on, keeping us very busy, but really exciting to be in there. At the start again, it's just myself and James at the moment, which is interesting because I've gone from having lots of reports, and all of a sudden I'm having to do some proper work. I'm having to do everything myself. So that's a mindset shift right there, just to delegation and overview to actually output. So that's been a big change for me, working from home in the office on my own most of the day. The discipline around that has been a big change.
Well, I've enjoyed listening to your story, Richie, and I've no doubts that Record Media will be equally as successful as the other ventures that you've led and that you've created, not just in this country, but obviously in the Caribbean and afar. So I want to wish you the very best of luck to yourself and James in your new venture. I think the 3 projects you talked about are so different and yet, so important in each of their different spheres that it's really a great start for a new business. I've no doubt it'll be successful. Thank you for joining me today on The Mindset Shift, and the very best of luck to you going forward.
No, thanks very much, Tim. Pleasure to talk to you this morning.
Thank you for watching The Mindset Shift. Don't forget to subscribe to get a new episode delivered straight to your inbox. You can do this by following the details below.